As you know, this channel is all about telling the stories of the heroic men and women who have made this country so exceptional. Like many of you, we feel strongly that it's critical to preserve their stories so that future generations understand just how selfless and courageous they were in safeguarding our freedoms. A few weeks ago, my wife and I had the chance to visit with one of those heroes in person. He lives not far from us in St. Louis, and we heard some truly amazing stories that he's never shared before. His name is Nick Swatek, and he recently turned 100 years old. And let me tell you, he is still as sharp as a tack. Nick flew 32 missions as a navigator in a B-24 bomber as part of the 486th Bomb Group. Yes, you heard me right. 32 missions. That would be 2 more than the required 30. As Nick reminded me, lasting 30 missions was pretty much a statistical anomaly given the high kill rate among bombers. What's even more remarkable is that his entire crew stayed intact for all 30 missions, and they didn't suffer a single casualty. Now let me tell you, that was extremely rare. When I asked Nick why that was, he said matter-of-factly and without a trace of ego or hubris, we were good. We were damn good. He started to well up as the words came tumbling from his mouth. In 80 years, I don't think he had ever said that out loud to anyone. Possibly because nobody had ever asked him, but more likely because it just wasn't something he was prone to saying. When we first met to visit with him, he told my wife and me candidly that he wasn't sure if he could even talk about his wartime experience. I reassured him that it was fine not to discuss it. Let's just enjoy some lunch. Like many from the greatest generation, they've suppressed the memories for so long that it's become almost a reflex not to talk about their time overseas. As we began eating and conversing, he started reminiscing. Nick told us that he enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor. He was just 18 years old, and there was no way he was sitting this one out, as he put it. Nick said the lines were so long and the Army so disorganized that it wasn't until February of 1942 before they actually got around to processing them. Nick wanted to be a pilot, but washed out and instead was made a navigator. It was at Davis Field in Arizona where he joined the 833rd Bombardment Squadron and began working with the B-24 crew that would stick together for the duration of the war. I mean, talk about a band of brothers. These guys were together for nearly 2 years. I just find that remarkable. In March of 1944, they were sent to Sudbury, England, where they joined the 486th Bomb Group. Over the next 5 months, they would fly 30 missions, most of them over Germany, with nary a scratch on their plane. After lunch, Nick took us through some of his boxes. He had saved everything. He kept some of his navigation maps and detailed statistics on each mission. I gotta say, it was like looking back in time. At one point, he apologized for the sloppy handwriting on some of the navigation maps. It was really cold at 20,000 feet, never above zero. It made writing difficult at times, he told me nonchalantly. At one point, he got a little glint in his eye and he leaned in a bit. We flew lead plane in almost every mission, he whispered to me, as if he was telling me some kind of secret. He literally couldn't get himself to say the words too loudly, lest it come off as bragging. But I gotta tell you, that was a big deal. The navigator in the lead plane is critically important. You're essentially leading the entire bombing group. A mistake wasn't just your mistake, it could screw up the entire mission. I then realized why he was whispering it. It's because he was welling up and he could barely get the words out. He was so proud of that fact. He probably had never said those words in his entire life to anyone, ever. It was literally 80 years of emotion just beginning to seep out. We actually went through some of the bombing runs, and he could recall them with extraordinary clarity. Which missions went well, which ones were milk runs, which ones were fogged in and they had to go to their secondary target. Now keep in mind, he's 100 years old, and he probably hadn't thought about his service in any meaningful way in 80 years. That he could remember the targets that they nailed, the ones that were near misses, and the ones that were fiascos, as he put it. At one point I asked him, what was scarier, dealing with fighters or dealing with flak? He looked at me like I was crazy and he said, flak, of course. He practically yelled it at me. And then Nick told me something that I'd never really heard before. If your group flew a tight formation, I mean really tight, so they couldn't get inside the formation, he lectured me, then the fighters didn't want anything to do with you. Nick said that the 833rd was so tight that after a while fighters would make a half-hearted run at them and then take off in the other direction. Flak, on the other hand, was a different thing altogether. How would you describe it? I stupidly asked. Scary as hell, he said. The 5 minutes over the target, the sky was pitch black, Nick said. All that flak. And all you could see was snow falling. I looked at him kind of quizzically. What do you mean by snow falling? Those were the parachutes falling out of the sky, he said with a mischievous grin. Wow. Point made. I told Nick that one of my all-time favorite movies was 12 O'Clock High, which was written just 4 years after the end of the war. How realistic was it? I asked him. Pretty accurate, he said, with a healthy dose of BS, he chortled. Nick told me that whenever a general led the pre-run briefing, you knew it was going to be a milk run and easy, and there wouldn't be any problems. When a major led the briefing, on the other hand, he said it was sure to be a bruiser, as he put it. Of course, with each passing day, we're losing more and more of our greatest generation heroes. At some point in the near future, sadly, they're all going to be gone. And a piece of America, a really important piece of America, will go with them. I can't tell you how much my wife and I enjoyed spending time with Nick, and we plan on visiting him again. I have a million more questions to ask him. Talking to him is like walking into the most amazing time portal ever. And I'm going to try to convince him to let me interview him on camera. Hopefully he will. I think all of you would love to meet Nick and hear from him. He's just such an amazing person and a true American hero, just like his entire generation. God bless you, Nick, and we'll talk to you soon.